Daniel, we need to talk.
Okay.
I don't think I'm happy anymore.
What are you saying?
I think we've grown apart.
Have we?
You've never wanted more.
More what?
More life, more success, more excitement.
So you've already made your decision, if that's what you want?
I'm filing for divorce.
Rebecca Mercer stood on her front porch staring at a group of construction workers gathered across the street. Bright orange survey markers had appeared overnight. Heavy machinery sat parked near the entrance to the neighborhood. Men in reflective vests walked back and forth carrying maps and measuring equipment. "What exactly is going on?" she demanded. A foreman looked up from his clipboard. "Ma'am, we're preparing for the expansion project." Rebecca frowned. "Expansion project?" "Yes, ma'am." She pointed toward the workers. "Who approved this?" The foreman hesitated, then he answered. "Owner." Rebecca crossed her arms. "And who exactly is the owner?" The foreman looked confused. "You don't know?" Her stomach tightened. "No." Man glanced toward a black luxury SUV parked nearby. "Daniel Mercer." Rebecca froze. For several seconds she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Daniel, her Daniel, the same man she had divorced 6 months earlier. The same man she had spent years calling average. The same man everyone pitied after the divorce. That was impossible, absolutely impossible, yet the foreman simply nodded. "He's the majority owner." Rebecca stared at him, then at the workers, then at the machinery. And for the first time since signing the divorce papers, fear began creeping into her chest, because suddenly she realized there was a question she had never bothered asking. Who was Daniel Mercer when nobody was looking, 6 months earlier? For 26 years, Daniel Mercer had lived a life that most people would consider ordinary. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase luxury. He didn't care about impressing strangers. He worked hard, paid his bills, maintained his home, and loved his wife. At least he thought he did. Every morning Daniel woke before sunrise. Every evening he came home exhausted. And every year he quietly put more money away than anyone realized. Not because he was hiding something, because he simply never talked about money. Rebecca used to admire that. Years ago she had described him as dependable, reliable, grounded, the kind of man you could build a life with. But somewhere along the way, those same qualities became weaknesses in her eyes. Dependable became boring. Reliable became predictable. Grounded became unambitious. By the 26th year of marriage, Rebecca barely looked at him anymore. Instead, she spent her time comparing her life to everyone else's. Social media didn't help, neither did her friends. Every week someone seemed to be posting photos from luxury vacations. New cars, designer handbags, expensive restaurants. Meanwhile, Daniel was focused on practical things, paying off debt, maintaining investments, planning for retirement. Rebecca grew resentful. She never admitted it directly. But Daniel noticed. He noticed the sighs, the criticism, the disappointment in her eyes whenever another friend's husband bought something expensive. One night they sat across from each other at the dinner table. Rebecca barely touched her food. Finally she looked up. "We need to talk." Daniel immediately knew what was coming. After 26 years, you learn to recognize certain tones. He set down his fork. "Okay." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I don't think I'm happy anymore." Words weren't surprising. Not really. What surprised him was how calm he felt hearing them. Almost as if some part of him had been expecting them for years. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. She looked away. "Think we've grown apart." Daniel nodded slowly. "Have we?" Rebecca hesitated, then said something that would stay with him forever. "Never wanted more." Daniel frowned. "More what?" "More life, more success, more excitement." He studied her face. For the first time he realized she had already made her decision. This conversation wasn't about solving problems. It was about announcing a verdict. 2 weeks later she filed for divorce. Friends were shocked. Family members took sides. People asked Daniel what happened. He never answered, not because he didn't know. Because he did. He simply didn't see any value in humiliating Rebecca publicly. If she wanted to leave, she could leave. The divorce became ugly almost immediately. Rebecca hired an aggressive attorney. Daniel hired a quiet one. The difference was obvious. Rebecca wanted to win. Daniel wanted peace. During negotiations, she fought for everything: the house, the savings, the vehicles, the investment accounts, furniture, jewelry, personal property. Everything became a battle. Friends encouraged her. "You deserve it. You supported him for years. Don't settle. Daniel listened to the demands without arguing. His attorney was baffled. Daniel, you realize she's asking for nearly everything. I know. You could fight this. Could. So why aren't you? Daniel stared out the office window, then shrugged. Because I don't want to spend the next 2 years fighting someone who already left. Attorney had no response. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Rebecca walked away feeling victorious. She kept the house, a luxury SUV, most of the savings, and nearly all the visible assets her friends celebrated. One even raised a glass during dinner. To new beginnings. Everyone cheered. Across town, Daniel moved into a small rental home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, nothing special. People felt sorry for him. Neighbors whispered, family members worried. But Daniel didn't seem angry or bitter or broken. In fact, the strangest thing about Daniel Mercer was that he looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted. Nobody understood it, least of all Rebecca. She expected anger, resentment, desperation. Instead, she got silence. And somehow that bothered her more. 2 months after the divorce, Daniel was unpacking boxes inside his rental home. Most contained ordinary things: books, tools, old photographs, family keepsakes. Then he found a dusty cardboard box he hadn't seen in years. Written across the side were 3 words: grandfather's document. Daniel almost tossed it aside. Almost. Then curiosity stopped him. He then opened the box. Inside were dozens of old papers. He saw land deeds, survey maps, property tax records, letters, most dated back decades. His grandfather had been a quiet farmer who rarely discussed money. After his death, Daniel inherited several small parcels of land scattered across the state. Nothing significant, or so he believed. Over the years, he paid property taxes automatically and forgot about them. Now, sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, he began sorting through the paperwork. One document caught his attention, then another. Then a third. Daniel frowned. Something didn't look right. The property description seemed larger than he remembered, much larger. He reached for his phone, opened a mapping application, and typed in one of the parcel numbers. Seconds later, his eyebrows rose. That couldn't be correct. He checked another, and another. Each result increased his confusion. The properties weren't in the middle of nowhere. They sat directly in the path of a proposed regional development corridor. Daniel stared at the screen, then back at the documents, then back at the screen again. For the first time in years, his pulse quickened. He had the strange feeling that something important had just entered his life, something that would change everything. But he had no idea how much. First surprise, the next morning Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the documents. The numbers simply didn't make sense. For years he had assumed the land was nearly worthless. His grandfather certainly never spoke about it. And after inheriting it, Daniel never paid much attention. Now he found himself staring at maps until midnight. By the 3rd day, curiosity won. He scheduled a meeting with a property attorney. The lawyer's office occupied the top floor of a modern building downtown. Daniel arrived carrying a worn folder filled with old deeds. The receptionist smiled politely. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Collins will see you now." Attorney greeted him warmly. He had gray hair, very expensive suit, and sharp eyes. The kind of man who spent his life examining details. Daniel handed over the documents. "I think I need help understanding what I own," lawyer smiled. "That usually means one of 2 things." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's the second?" "You're either worth less than you thought," the attorney opened the folder, "or much more." 2 hours later, neither man was smiling, because the deeper they looked, the stranger the situation became. Property after property appeared active. Taxes were current. Ownership records remained valid. Every document checked out. Finally, the attorney leaned back. "Daniel, what? Do you know where these parcels are located?" "I checked online." Lawyer nodded slowly. "Then I know they're near the proposed development corridor." Attorney laughed. "Near it." He spun his monitor around. A large regional map filled the screen. Red lines marked future infrastructure projects, industrial expansion zones, commercial development plans. and transportation upgrades, and right through the center of everything sat Daniel's land, his stomach tight. The attorney pointed toward the screen. Developers have been fighting over this area for 2 years. Daniel stared silently. Much is it worth? The lawyer hesitated. Daniel immediately noticed. Right now, Daniel nodded. The attorney removed his glasses. Conservatively, another pause. Then came a number Daniel would never forget. $5 million. Daniel laughed, not because it was funny, because it sounded absurd. 5 million, that wasn't even possible. He shook his head. No, the attorney leaned forward. Daniel, he tapped the map. That's today's value. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? The lawyer smiled. It means if the project moves forward. His voice lowered. It could become much more. Daniel left the office in a daze. For 30 years he had worried about bills, mortgages, repairs, retirement. And all that time something valuable had been sitting quietly in the background, waiting. 3 weeks later the first developer called. Daniel almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar. The voice wasn't. Very confident, polished, persistent. The caller introduced himself as Richard Langford, Senior Acquisition Director. They wanted to discuss Daniel's properties. At first Daniel assumed they wanted a simple purchase, a straightforward transaction. He was wrong, very, very wrong. The meeting took place inside a luxury hotel conference suite. When Daniel arrived, 3 executives were already waiting. Large screens displayed maps, charts, detailed forecasts, growth projections. The entire presentation lasted 40 minutes. By the end, Daniel understood something important. The land wasn't valuable because of what it was. It was valuable because of where it was: future highways, commercial centers, distribution hubs. Entire communities would eventually grow around those properties. Then came the offer. Daniel nearly dropped the document. The number exceeded anything he imagined. Yet something about the proposal bothered him, not the money. The urgency. Everyone seemed desperate, almost nervous, as if they feared someone else might get there first. Daniel asked a simple question. What happens if I don't sell? The room became very quiet. One executive smiled. Most people would sell. Daniel noticed he didn't answer the question. A few days later another developer called, then another, then another. Within 6 weeks Daniel received 6 separate offers, each larger than the last. That's when he realized something. The real value wasn't what they offered. The real value was what they weren't saying. So Daniel hired advisors, good lawyers, smart property consultants, development specialists with reputation. For the first time in his life, Daniel stopped assuming everyone knew more than him. And he started asking questions. The answers changed everything. While Rebecca enjoyed her new life, Daniel quietly began building a different future. Not a flashy future, not the kind posted on social media. A strategic one. His advisors showed him something fascinating. Most developers focused on major parcels, large visible properties, but dozens of smaller parcels existed nearby, ignored, overlooked, undervalued. Daniel began purchasing them. He started slowly, very quietly, through a newly formed company. No press releases. Not even a public announcements. No much attention. The first purchase cost less than a luxury car. The second wasn't much more. The third came from a retired couple eager to relocate. Month after month Daniel continued. Nobody noticed, even especially Rebecca. She remained convinced she understood exactly who Daniel was. A man she had outgrown. She felt he was a man she had left behind. A man destined to remain ordinary. But one afternoon she spotted him in town. He was leaving a coffee shop. For a moment she considered saying hello. Then she saw his vehicle, an older pickup truck, nothing impressive. She just smirked. Somehow seeing that truck reassured her. It confirmed everything she believed. Daniel was still Daniel, still predictable, still small. What she didn't know was that the truck meant nothing. Because Daniel wasn't spending money. He was positioning assets. Every available dollar flowed into acquisitions, land, property, opportunity, things most people ignored. Things his grandfather would have understood immediately. One evening Daniel stood inside a conference room reviewing a massive development map. His advisors sat around the table. Colored markers covered the display. Property boundaries, future roads, commercial zones, industrial expansions. Daniel studied everything silently. Finally, one advisor smiled. "You realize what's happening, right?" Daniel looked up. What? The man pointed toward the map. Almost every highlighted section belonged to Daniel's company. The advisor folded his arms. 6 months ago they wanted to buy from you, he smiled. Now they're going to need you. Daniel stared at the map, then slowly smiled. For the first time since the divorce, he felt something unexpected. It was not revenge, nor not satisfaction. He saw a possibility. Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca remained completely unaware, but not for much longer, because strange things were beginning to happen in her neighborhood. And soon she would be forced to ask a question she never expected. Who exactly was Daniel Mercer? The first sign appeared 3 months later. A small yellow notice attached to a utility pole. Rebecca barely looked at it. The second sign arrived 2 weeks later, then another. Then another. Soon surveyors began appearing throughout the neighborhood. They measured sidewalks, roads, vacant lots, drainage systems. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. Rumors spread quickly. Some residents claimed a shopping center was coming. Others believed a technology company had purchased nearby land. One thing was certain. Property values were rising fast. Every week another neighbor sold. Moving trucks appeared constantly. New investors arrived. Construction companies visited. Rebecca watched the changes with growing curiosity, then concern. One afternoon she attended a neighborhood gathering. Everyone discussed the same topic, the development. An elderly resident spoke first. I heard the new owner bought 12 properties already. Someone else shook their head. 12, try 20. Another neighbor leaned forward. They own nearly half the area now. Rebecca frowned. Who? Nobody knew. The purchases were made through a company, Mercer Development Holdings. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Later that night she searched online. The company information was limited, private ownership. Minimal public records, very little detail. Yet one thing caught her attention. The company's attorney. She recognized the name immediately. It was the same law firm that had represented Daniel's property interests months earlier. Her stomach tightened. No, that couldn't be right. She dismissed the thought immediately. Daniel wasn't a developer. Daniel wasn't an investor. Daniel certainly wasn't buying neighborhoods. Yet for some reason the thought refused to leave her mind. Days later she drove past a large parcel near the edge of town. Construction signs surrounded the property. A massive billboard displayed the project details. At the bottom appeared a logo, Mercer Development Holdings. This time her stomach dropped, because suddenly she remembered something. Mercer, Daniel's last name. Rebecca spent the next 48 hours searching for answers. At first she expected to prove herself wrong. Instead, every search created new questions: property records, corporate filings, business registrations. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Mercer Development Holdings belonged to Daniel Mercer. She sat motionless at her kitchen table. The room suddenly felt smaller. For years she believed she understood Daniel completely. She thought she knew his limitations, his ambitions, his future. Now she realized she had only known the version of Daniel he chose to show the world. The realization terrified her, because if she was wrong about that, what else had she been wrong about? The answer arrived 1 week later. A formal notice appeared in her mailbox. Community development meeting. Attendance recommended. Rebecca read the document 3 times. The meeting would reveal final plans for the neighborhood expansion project. Out of curiosity, and something else she refused to admit, she decided to attend. The conference center was packed. Residents filled every seat. Developers occupied the front rows. City officials reviewed documents. Large screens displayed maps. Rebecca took a seat near the middle. Then the presentation began. A project executive stepped to the podium. "Good evening, everyone," crowd quieted. The executive spent 20 minutes discussing infrastructure improvements, economic growth, future development, property values. Then he said something unexpected. "Before we continue, we'd like to thank our primary investment partner." Room applauded politely. Rebecca barely paid attention until the presenter spoke again. "Mr. Daniel Mercer." Her heart stopped. A side door opened and Daniel walked into the room. The entire audience turned. Some people gasped, others whispered. Daniel looked exactly the same calm expression, same quiet confidence, same ordinary appearance. Yet everything had changed, because now everyone knew who he was. The presenter continued speaking. "Without Mr. Mercer, this project would not exist. Applause filled the room. Rebecca sat frozen, unable to move. Unable to speak, unable to understand how the man she dismissed had become the most important person in the room. But the meeting continued. Rebecca barely heard any of it. Her attention remained fixed on Daniel. Developers consulted him, attorneys deferred to him, investors greeted him. Everywhere she looked, people treated him with respect, not because of money, because of influence, because of vision, because he had quietly built something significant while everyone else underestimated him. Then came the question and answer session. Residents lined up behind microphones. One after another, they asked questions. Daniel answered calmly, confidently, respectfully. The room listened. Rebecca noticed something strange. Nobody interrupted him, nobody doubted him, nobody dismissed him the way she once had. At one point, an investor laughed. "Become quite successful, Mr. Mercer." The audience smiled. Daniel thought for a moment, then replied, "Become more patient." Room laughed softly. But Rebecca felt those words hit differently, because patience had always been Daniel's greatest strength, the very quality she once considered weakness. Near the end of the meeting, the mayor addressed the audience. "Like to recognize Mr. Mercer for his role in revitalizing this region." Crowd stood, applause erupted, people cheered. Rebecca remained seated, not because she was angry, because she was overwhelmed. For years she had viewed Daniel through a narrow lens. Now that lens had shattered, and the truth standing before her felt almost impossible to process. Several weeks later, Rebecca requested a meeting. Daniel agreed. They met at a small cafe near the river, the same cafe they had visited years earlier. For a few moments neither spoke. Finally, Rebecca broke the silence. "You should have told me." Daniel looked confused. "Told you what?" She gestured helplessly. "Of this." Daniel smiled gently. "I didn't know all of this." Rebecca looked down. That answer hurt more than she expected. Because it was true, Daniel hadn't hidden a fortune. He had discovered an opportunity, then built something from it. The old version of her would have argued, defended herself, made excuses. Instead, she asked the question she should have asked years earlier. "Were you happy?" Daniel considered it carefully, then answered honestly. "Toward the end." Rebecca nodded. Neither was she. For several minutes they talked about ordinary things, life, family, the future. Eventually, Rebecca asked the question she had avoided since the community meeting. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel smiled softly. "Divorce?" She nodded. Daniel looked out the window, then back at her. "No." Answer wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was simply true, because the divorce had forced both of them to confront realities they spent years avoiding. Eventually they stood. He said goodbye and walked in different directions. For the first time, Rebecca understood something important. Daniel's greatest success wasn't the land. It wasn't even the company nor the money. His greatest success was becoming someone who no longer needed validation from people who underestimated him. Months later, construction transformed the neighborhood. Businesses arrived. Jobs appeared. Property values soared. The development became one of the region's largest success stories. And Daniel Mercer, he continued living much the same way he always had, quietly, patiently, without needing attention, because he understood something many people never learn. The greatest opportunities often belong to those willing to see value where everyone else sees nothing. As for Rebecca, whenever she drove past the development signs, she remembered one simple truth. The greatest mistake she ever made wasn't leaving Daniel Mercer. It was believing she already knew who he was.